My name is Liza Maria, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm honored to have a really nice guest on my podcast, and his name is Andrew Parris. And Andrew is the president of the Inspire 24 and also worked at NASA for 13 years as a television contractor. Hello, Andrew. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So, I know you did so many cool things like such as your G flights and also scuba diving with astronauts, which in my opinion that's awesome and that's great. So, can you tell us more about you like about the Inspire 24 project?
Sure. Well, the Inspired 24 is a group of Inspiration 4 contestants from the 2020. What was it, 2021 by now? Yeah, the Inspiration 4 mission, which was announced a couple of years ago, and a bunch of us were contestants. We entered the contest, but we didn't win. But we got invited to go watch the launch, so we all showed up and kind of connected, and we met each other for dinner the night before the launch, and it was such an interesting, diverse group of space enthusiasts, I guess, or space positive people, we like to say. We decided to stay connected. In fact, funny enough, during the dinner, there was a pause in the music, and I said out loud, somebody in this group's going to fly in space soon. And everybody like, yeah, ha, ha, kind of funny. Well, since then, we've had two of our Inspire 24 members be selected to fly in space on future missions. Ruben Salinas and Dr. Iman Jahir, which hopefully you get to talk to soon for your podcast.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, so we started this group, and so basically we're a group of people who want to experience the overview effect and help other people experience the overview effect, which is you can do that through a myriad of ways: flying in space, flying to the stratosphere. There's VR technology, but it's all about getting people to think about the planet Earth um, differently, to start treating the planet better. I don't know if people know about what the overview effect, and I'll explain what that is. The overview effect
Sure.
is something that was coined by astronauts in the 80s when they started flying shuttle missions where they were up for a week or more, and they would look down on Earth and they would realize that when they saw the entire Earth, they didn't see borders, they didn't see political boundaries. They just saw a single planet, a single entity, and it changed. They experienced a fundamental change in the way they think about the planet and how they think about themselves. There's a loss of ego and so forth. And it's something that we think is a very important tool to help save the planet. When you start getting people who are more worried about taking care of the planet, then obviously people will get the chance to help save the planet and give it I have kids and grandkids. I want them to have a healthy planet to live on, and my future kids too. So anyway, so that's one of the reasons we would put together the Inspired 24, and we're about 140 strong, and you're just one of our newest members. Thank you for joining.
It's my
And
pleasure to
that's
be a
yeah,
member.
and that's the great thing about this group. It's every walk of life all over the world. The only requirements are that you're interested in space and want to help spread the word. That's basically it.
That's awesome, and I'm really glad to be part and be a member of Inspire 24 because I'm a huge space fan. I mean, for like 4 years,
Mhm.
I'm a huge space fan.
Cool.
So, do you have any favorite stories from NASA or your career that you want to share with us?
Whoa. Yeah, just, I was with NASA for 13 years. I'm a television engineer by trade, so I got a chance to go work out in California where they land the shuttles at the old Dryden Flight Research Center. It's called Armstrong now. It's located at Edwards Air Force Base. And so I came on in time for the return to flight for STS-26. And my job entailed being there to support NASA missions, not only shuttle missions, but also aerospace and any kind of flights. But our primary contract was to support the shuttle landing, doing the video. So if you see any of the video from that era, I was involved with
Yes.
that. And my favorite part of it was working. I was on TV2, which was the van that pulled up with the convoy and got to sit next to the orbiter, and we would document the crews when they came out. And then after the crews left, the real work started. We use our camera to send pictures back to the Johnson Space Center and the Kennedy Space Center so they could do tile survey, because the space shuttle was very dependent on these very delicate black and white silica tiles that protected the orbiter from the heat. And so there was a lot of work. They were very complicated. No two tiles were exactly the same shade, so they needed to get ahead of the game. So they needed to do tile survey. They needed to know what had been damaged and so forth. And so our camera would be set up underneath it, and you would they would shoot individuals. A guy with a radio would say, "Okay, we'll shoot this one, we'll shoot this one," and this could take hours. And then probably one of my favorite things was late in the day, just before they would pack up the orbiter to roll it back to get it ready to put it on the 747 to fly back to Kennedy. They'd let us crawl in the flight deck and the mid deck of the space shuttle. So I got to crawl in there, and it is tiny, tiny, tiny. People don't realize how small it is in there. It's just shoulder to shoulder. And it's something interesting. A lot of people don't think about it, but when you go into space for a week or 2 weeks, and the environment's, there's circulation, don't get any fresh air, it starts to smell like a locker room in there. That's one of the realities of space flight people don't think about. But you know what? It wouldn't bother me if I went up there. So, but yeah, I did work there doing shuttle landings at Dryden. Moved to in 1990, moved back to Houston, where I was from, and worked on the TV contract. And that was a field day for me. I got to do so much stuff. I got to scuba dive with the astronauts doing EVA training in the WET-F, and then later when it opened the NBL, I flew zero G on the microgravity aircraft for a couple years. Did some traveling for NASA. Went to Moscow 3 times to document space station construction. Also got to go to Baikonur for the launch of the first space station crew in 2000. Yeah, so it was just a fun time as a space, like you. I was all the way back when I was like 7 years old, I was big into space because that's when the Apollo missions were happening. I remember my first real memory of the space program was the Apollo 8 Christmas Eve broadcast from around the moon. We got to see live pictures from the moon, which was amazing. It was this black and white blurry image, and it said pictures from the moon or something like that. It just struck me. My dad said, "Yeah, those are live pictures from the moon." I'm like, wow. And so ever since I've been space struck, I guess you call it.
Wow, that's a really nice story. And how was it like to work at NASA for 13 years? Like, what was the
Oh,
coolest thing around?
well, the coolest thing was just being there. I made friends with a lot of astronauts. For
Wow.
8 of those years, I was what they call engineer in charge of the TV studio. We had a TV studio there in Building 2 South, still there, and that's where we would do our live press conferences or whatever. And a lot of astronauts would come in because they would be requests for interviews. Astronauts, while they're trained, get a lot of, especially if they're getting ready for a flight
Yeah.
and there's press media opportunities. But a lot of them can't travel to go do these in-person events, so we would do them via satellite. So they'd come into our studio, and so we would get to know them quite a bit. Back when like John Glenn was going to fly on STS-95, he spent a lot of time in our studio, so much that we gave him his own desk because he was there so much. He didn't have to go back and forth back to the astronaut office, to his office to do work, because he was still a sitting senator at the time too. So he was involved with, doing his job in the Senate while he was training, while he was doing press briefings. So it was amazing. But yeah, we get to know a lot of them. Like I'm still friends with Katie Coleman and Don Thomas, and a couple of them out there. And we run into each other once in a while. I ran into Scott Parazynski yesterday at the airport in Washington. So it's a small world, but yeah, just the coolest thing about working at NASA was working at NASA. Let's put it that way.
And especially with the astronauts, because in my opinion, it's so nice to meet an astronaut because I think I even told you that like last year in 2023, I also got the chance to speak in front of the astronauts, Nicole Stott, Sarah Sabri, and our astronaut Dmitry Prunariu, which he's a Romanian astronaut, and it was great. And I think working at NASA is really cool. And also, you mentioned that you also flew like in zero G flights, and how is like to fly in a zero G plane? Like,
Oh,
how the G's feels like.
well, I'll tell you, flying in zero G, or microgravity as it's called, is very addictive. The two years that I flew, my job was to document activities. So that means I had to use a camcorder. And one of the problems with it when you're getting in that environment where you're flying in a airplane and you fly a parabolic arc, you fly up, and as you come over the top of the arc, that top 30 seconds, you get this microgravity. And then as you go down, you hit the bottom of the arc, you get about 2 Gs on the bottom of it. So you get this microgravity 2 Gs, microgravity 2 Gs. Well, if you do that 60 times, that can be pretty tiring. But the 30 seconds of zero G is amazing. But because I was using a camera to shoot and I was looking through a viewfinder, I had a tendency to get sick, get nauseous, because that happens with your vestibular system your information from your eyes to your brain is different from uh, your vestibular system to your brain. And when that confusion happens, that's when nausea occurs. So as part of my job, I kind of had to get sick. It was just kind of the reality of it. But it was because it was my job, but it was still fun. And the moments where I got to actually just float around and, in the microgravity were fantastic. So much so that a couple of years ago, a group called Space Plus, which is part of the Uplift Aerospace, their Web3 division, they had a contest to select somebody to fly in space. And they picked five finalists, four of which were I-24 members, by the way. And they, as part of their training, were going to fly a zero-G flight. And I thought, you know what? I spent all those years flying, working, and not having fun. I want to go have fun. So I decided this was a bucket list thing. I'm in my 60s, might as well. So I called them up and said, hey, can I get a seat in there? And they said, sure. So I dropped the money. It was about $8,000, which is a lot of money. But I got to go fly, and they let me wear my flight suit from when I worked at NASA. I still fit in it, which was amazing. So I got to go fly, and so I got to fly with Mike Mungo, Grumman Salinas, Trent Tresh, Sydney Hamilton, and Joan Marie Meisner. And also we got to fly with astronaut Cyan Proctor from the Inspiration 4 mission. She was coming along to do some of her art in zero G. And also one of our other I-24 members, Keith Yan, his call sign is Code. He flew along too. And I had to tell you, I had more fun than I've ever had just about in anything in my life. It is so addictive. You can't, it's hard to describe. I've heard people, it's freedom, it's floating, it's you lose all your sense of being held down and so forth. But it's really just the best feeling of feeling just freedom is the best way I can describe it. Actually, I've heard it also described as the best feeling you can have, except for loving someone and having someone love you back, which is very poetic. I like that. So I got to go fly 15 parabolas on that. And that was fun. And it was more fun was flying with friends, people because then you can have fun, enjoy each other and so forth. So we had a great time. And just by sheer luck, a couple months later, a group called Astro Access, which is a group that's trying to make space accessible for people with handicaps, was doing a zero-G flight as part of their coordination to test whether people with handicaps can work in microgravity. They did a flight out here at Ellington Field here in Houston. I still live near NASA. After I left in 2000, I still stayed here. And so I heard about it like the summer before. So I said, well, I'm just going to volunteer. So I took the vacation time. So I told them, you know what, I'll do whatever you want. I'll run errands. So I was picking up food and water, and I was ironing patches on flight suits. And part of the flight included people to come as safety flyers, which is working with the people doing their experiments. You have to have somebody to kind of watch and make sure they're okay. And Astro Access had arranged for other people to come do that. And unfortunately, the plane had a 1-day delay. So it was delayed one day, and one of the safety flyers, matter of fact, it was Scott Przynski, couldn't stay. So George Whiteside, who runs Astro Access, said, hey, Andrew, you want to fly zero G? And I said, yes, sir, put me in. So I got to fly a second time, but on somebody else's dime, which was even more fun. But I was a safety coach, I guess you'd call it. So I had to monitor Dr. Sherry Wells Jensen, who was doing some tests on whether a blind person can get in and out of the seat from a 5-point harness. And she's a real jokester. She was a lot of fun to work with. In fact, the whole group, I have never met a more impressive group of people in my life. I joke that, not joke. I talk about how when I came into that, I was a supporter, but then I left as an advocate. Somebody's actively supporting him and trying to help out. So yeah, zero G is something that if you get a chance to do, whether it's in a plane or going into space, do it. Don't hesitate.
That's awesome, and especially with the zero G flights, I think are also good parts and bad parts, and the bad parts can be like getting sick and
We don't talk
it's
about the
fine.
bad parts.
But
Actually, to be totally honest, the zero G company does a fantastic job in helping people get ready for that. And they have, if you follow everything they say, no problems whatsoever. They have a suggested diet for the night before and also the morning of. Then they have like the Dramamine patches you can wear. There's also a little
Yes.
like a wrist shocker, which I used on both my flights, and that was the best part. But the interesting thing is that when you fly in, if you go to space and you experience a microgravity, you experience that all the time. Once you're in microgravity, you're that way for ever how long. Whether it's a short flight of 5 minutes, you get 5 minutes of microgravity, and then you come back. Or if you're go into orbit, go to the space station, you're in microgravity, which is great because it's not stressing or anything. But the only thing is with the parabolic flights, because you're going from zero G to 1.5 Gs, it's physically tiring. So when you get done, you're like, great, but you're like completely exhausted, emotionally and physically exhausted, but it's a good exhaustion. So
I think zero G flights are great and also fun because you even mentioned that. And they're also preparing astronauts to fly in space, like on missions. And I'm pretty sure space doesn't feel like the same as in a zero G flight, or they probably do. But I think being in space, I heard so many stories from astronauts that they were saying like in space is kind of different, but it's the same as in a zero G flight. But you
it's just
experience
longer.
yes,
Yeah.
and you experience like the same things. But I think zero G flights are great. And also
Yes, I agree.
yes. And also, Andrew, do you think you're also going to fly in space like the second astronaut that Mundao has like in the near future?
Well, that's technically Iman is he's the
Yes.
Moondao second. If Moondao decides to do another one, I will send surely enter at the contest. I'm very big into the Web3 space community right now. Not only Moondao but also Space Plus, Crypto Space Agency, which is relabeled as Sarah. They're a space engineering and research agency. Copernic Space, I'm very involved with them. Axiom Space 3, they're the Web3 division of Axiom. People are sending crews to the International Space Station, which that was some of the most fun. I got to go watch the Axiom 3 launch, and they took some of the community members got their pictures put on a poster, and they flew it and they took a picture of it in space. And I'll give it to you to put in here, but
Sure.
it'll be the first time it's been released. I might get in trouble, but that's okay. Oh, so another thing in that picture, just below to the right of me, you can see Dr. Iman. He's in there too.
That's awesome. And also, when Dr. Iman is going to fly in space, are they just going to take pictures of the things they're going to bring in space, or just also do like some experiments, maybe? Or
That's all to be determined. They're still working on that. That's part of it. But Dad, doctor, he's a doctor. He's a
yes.
cardiologist, and he's interested in doing some science in space. Blue has given other people opportunities, so they're waiting to see about that.
That's great. And especially you told us you worked at NASA, and also you said you did like scuba diving with the astronauts. And how was it like
Mhm.
to go scuba diving with the astronauts? Like
Oh, scuba diving just by itself is fun. If you're just a recreational diver, it's just fun. But to get to do it in a pool with astronauts in EMUs and around test articles, fixtures, majority of my time was spent in a small pool called the WETF, the Weightless Environment Training Facility. And in there, they had a mock-up of the shuttle payload bay. So astronauts would do their training. The astronauts were all required to do a minimum EVA training of if doing payload bay door operations. If they get on orbit and the doors can't open, they have to learn how to get out there and crank on a rope and pull them, and also do the opposite to close them up. But there was also mission specific and payload specific stuff. We did a lot of stuff with the Hubble, all those repair missions. I was there during all those trainings. And just toward the end is when the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory opened up, which was much bigger, 2 million gallons, has a mock-up of the full space station in it. In fact, now I've been seeing some video. They're doing lunar training, EVA training. They've got a moonscape on the bottom of the pool, and they put astronauts. In fact, Axiom just had their new lunar suit that NASA has ordered. That first time they put it in the water, and nobody was in it. They just put weights in it to make sure it would stay sealed and so forth. But yeah, scuba diving was great. A lot of um, uh, videotaping. Once again, I was doing a camera, but it was called a float camera. It had a cable on it, and the idea was that you had to keep the camera on the astronaut's face, because the people in the control room want to make sure that everything was going okay with the astronauts, to make sure they were okay. They were in two-way communications, but they would also, help them along in their tasks and so forth. Had a couple occasions where I had tools fall on me too, and then unfortunately in a pool, they're buoyant, but stuff still sinks, so stuff would hit me on the head, and I was like, yeah, here you go.
That's awesome. And especially the last question for this podcast is, have you ever tried on an astronaut costume? Like to be in one ever?
You mean a spacesuit?
Yes.
Oh yes, yeah. So I had had an opportunity at one point to help. They were part of the EMU facilities they had to do maintenance on the spacesuits, and they would require people to come in and help test them out. They didn't want to waste astronauts' time, so they have test subjects. So I got Phil West, who was the spacesuit engineer who I worked with, had me come in and put one on and did a flex test and so forth. And he took a picture of me during it. But then since then I've also, like, one of the things that the Inspire 24 were doing is space flight training with a group called Chase out of the University of Arizona in Tucson. Chase stands for the Center for Human Space Exploration. And they have a couple classes that get you pressure suit familiarization and also water egress training. And part of the pressure suit familiarization was putting on a suit and figuring out how to work in it and so forth.
That's great, and that's actually all your stories were wonderful, and thank you so much for joining me here today on my podcast, sharing your space stories, and also working for NASA 13 years, and being on lots of zero-G flights, which is awesome. And good luck in the future with everything and Inspire 24.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.